All right, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to our final session of the day, which is Momentum for the Future, Shaping Next Steps. To deliver our concluding address, we have panelists for this, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'm honored to invite Dr. Daniel P. Schrag, Professor, Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, Harvard University. A round of applause as I welcome Sir on stage. Yes, the placard is there, sir. Next, ladies and gentlemen, Shri Chinmay Acharya, Director, Program India, who is also our moderator for this session. Very warm welcome to you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, up next is Ms. Deepa Bagai, Country Head, NRDC, India. Well, Deepa ma'am is around. Yeah, she'll come and join. And this absolutely amazing human being, Ms. Archana Soreng, former member of United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change 2020 to 2023. A very, very warm welcome once again. You're always the finale for us. Please join us. Very warm welcome. Yes, and Deepa ma'am. All right, I request, I give the stage to Shri Chinmay Acharya, as he's the moderator, to take it forward.
Thank you, Anisha. I'm mindful that this is the last session, and I thank all the participants for their patience. We will be efficient in conducting this panel discussion. At the outset, let me add my warm welcome to Dr. Daniel Schrag. He is joining us just today. So welcome, Dr. Schrag. We look forward to hearing your remarks. So let me first start with Dr. Schrag. We, in the last 2 days, have been discussing about the integration of extreme heat and sustainable cooling solutions. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, and also would like to request you to share thoughts about the upcoming event that Harvard University is doing later this week.
Sure. First of all, thank you to everyone. I think the room's thinned out a little bit, but it's nice to be here, and I'm very sorry that I couldn't attend the whole event. I arrived at 3 a.m. this morning, so my eyelids are a little droopy, and I apologize for that. So I was here in this very room 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, for a 3-day workshop on adaptation to climate change. And I actually think it's very exciting to hear that this conversation is expanding. It's a very important discussion, and frankly, one that has been neglected for many years. I think both internationally, within Europe, within the US, within all over the world, the discussion of adaptation to climate change has been neglected. And I can understand why people were afraid in the environmental movement of somehow not enough investment in solving the problem by reducing emissions, by talking about how to adapt to the problem. But such a neglect was really, to me, cruel to most of the world that is going to suffer the experience of climate change. Because we have to face the basic irony of climate change, that most of the people who will suffer the most severe consequences are people who did the least to cause the problem. And that contrast is going to get greater and greater. It's going to come into greater and greater clarity in the coming years and decades. In fact, I'm not convinced that the Paris Agreement can even hold up, given its biased focus on mitigation. Let's be clear, we have to reduce emissions because the alternative is unthinkable. And at the same time, if we don't actually think about the experience of people, we are missing the big picture entirely. And so to me, it's very, very exciting to hear the wide variety of conversations, and certainly the issue of heat in South Asia and what to do about it is front and center, not just because it's an area with so many people and so affected by the problem, but also because in some ways it's a laboratory for the world to confront this issue in a serious way. And so it's a wonderful place to start. And that is why my colleagues at Harvard, we've organized a meeting starting tomorrow and going through the rest of the week on a very similar topic. I hope that great minds think alike, that ultimately that we align with many of the themes and the purposes for your program as well. I also understand that the Ministry for Environment, Forestry, and Climate Change called a meeting today on heat action plans. Heating and cooling, yes. Which, I in some ways that's terrible planning. In other ways, it's a compliment. It's to say that there's a flurry of activity in this space. And again, that's wonderful to see. I do think there are a few things to keep in mind, though, that I am weighing, and they will be reflected in my remarks tomorrow at our plenary discussion. One is, as a geologist, I think about the timescale of climate change. What is happening on the Earth has really long timescales. The timescales of the ocean warming, the timescales of the ice sheets melting, has timescales of centuries to millennia. And we react on human timescales of maybe months to years. And that's in some ways an inappropriate timescale. We are almost incapable of doing the kind of long-term planning. When I was here 2 years ago, I listened to 3 days of talks about climate change adaptation, and not a single person talked about heat waves beyond the next 3 years. Now, in some ways, that makes perfect sense. When you're a country experiencing devastating heat waves right now, and it's March, we're entering the most dangerous season now over the next 3 months, it makes sense that you focus on heat action plans for today and don't think about the future. And yet, as a climate scientist, I can say with great certainty that what is coming has nothing to do with what's happening today. India has actually warmed substantially less than the global average. And that's partly because of air pollution, reflecting aerosols that have kept the climate cool. It's partly because of irrigation for agriculture that has caused evaporation and cooled the climate. But whatever the physical reasons, India has not even experienced yet what is coming. And what is coming, there's a lot of uncertainty. And what I mean by that is we scientists can still not tell, we cannot tell the public if India warms by 1 degree Celsius in the next 30 years, how much will heat waves worsen? The relationship between the average temperature and the extremes, we still don't understand. And there will be surprises. And the problem is that we are getting close to some of the limits for human viability. We have people coming from Australia who were the first. Steve Sherwood was the first person to write about this wet bulb temperature limit. Now, none of us know what the answers are. And I think it's clear from listening to the panels this afternoon, we're all struggling with solutions. We're trying to work together to think about how to move forward. I will say that all of the solutions, whether it's air conditioning, whether it's better design of buildings, whether it's underground shelters, whatever the answer is, I think we need all of it. Currently, there's less than 10% of households in India have air conditioning. If we're really lucky, that number by 2050 will be maybe 50% or 60%. That's still an enormous number of people who will be vulnerable. And I fear that we really won't take this problem seriously until many more people suffer. And that's where we have to be prepared. And in some ways, the job for everybody here in the audience, for NRDC, for university scholars who think about these problems, our job is to be ready when the public will is there. It's very hard, the last panel talking about communication, creating public will is very difficult. But our job in some ways is to prepare and to be ready so that when the public is ready, we actually can guide them to a proper solution. And that is the task for all of us in the coming years. And at the same time, we should be humble because we can't always predict what is going to happen. I'll stop there because I think this is such an important discussion. I really came to India this time, again, to listen and learn and work with counterparts. I think it's exciting that the government is more open to it than they were a couple of years ago. And I hope that that trend continues, because I can tell you that the climate trend will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very thoughtful message. I wanted to build on one thing that you mentioned is about the imbalance in focus on mitigation and adaptation. How can we overcome that challenge?
I think there's progress. I was an advisor to President Obama during his 8 years in office. And in the end of his first term, I helped write a letter to President Obama recommending what he should do in his second term on climate change. And the very first thing we suggested was focus on the US national preparedness, which is what we called adaptation. Adaptation sounds awkward to most people. It sounds painful, whereas preparing sounds much better. Again, communication is important. And it was met with huge resistance. Some very prominent politicians, supporters of climate change, people you've heard of, called me and said, "Oh, don't mention the issue of adaptation." That's how strong that was. And that was in 2013. That was only 12 years ago. I think that's changed today. And that's good. It's still not changed enough. When it comes to communication, I've actually created an NGO in the US that uses advertising agencies, essentially the best experts from advertising, to think about how to communicate climate change to the public. And what we've learned, frankly, is that data matter. So you actually have to measure your communication, measure how people respond. Some messages work better than others. But there is no question that talking about how people experience climate change and focusing on adaptation first, we believe leads to more willingness to deal with mitigation later, as opposed to thinking that you first do mitigation and then deal with adaptation. They're not a trade-off. You have to do both. We forget that sometimes. But I think adaptation is going to happen because it's going to have to happen. This is not something that is in the future. Here in India, next month we may have a terrible heat wave. So it's a pressing, urgent problem, and adaptation is not a choice anymore.
So Archana, I'll come to you. My johar to you first. And you were there yesterday as well. You were during the day-to-day. You heard about the critical issues of extreme heat and how sustainable cooling can support mitigate it. So, what are your key takeaways from the last 2 days?
Thank you so much, and johar to you and to everyone here. I think for me, this has been extremely special, and I want to take this opportunity to thank NRDC, World Bank, and Dalberg. And mostly, I would also like to say it from a lens of thank you for opening doors, because I feel only when we are welcomed, and I have felt so much love, care, and compassion here. And I have also felt very safe here. So thank you for creating this space, Deepaji. This really means a lot, because this gives me the strength to go back and tell people that these are good people we should engage more with. And that is something which I truly believe, in the sense of what I have also said yesterday of love, kindness, and solidarity, that how important it is to have different stakeholders on board in a very safe space where everyone is bringing their own realities. And that is one thing which I'm taking back home, that in this journey, not always, but in most critical times like this, we find our own people, which also Diya was saying. We have to find our own people, and I have found my own people here, which I see as a long-term going ahead. The other thing which I also felt, which was a very insightful and enriching for me and very new for me, is if I see it from an external perspective and not wearing the hat I'm wearing now, we don't know what is happening. All of these things which were shared in the past 2 days was extremely new for me, a lot of it, because I was seeing it from one lens, but having the opportunity where different stakeholders, whether it is from the lens of critical scientific knowledge and information, or what is happening on ground in terms of solutions, learning it has been such an enriching experience for me, and gives me more strength and information. Oh, these are the websites I should be looking at. These are the organization I should follow. These are the social media account and organization I should be connected with, which is again another important takeaway, because in this journey, it's very isolating. Like, you feel extremely lonely if you don't find your people and connect with your people, and don't understand where's the middle ground where you come in and where everyone is coming together and creating solutions. So I would also like to take away that. There are one last thing which I would like to emphasize by giving an example, which I would also like to thank Dr. Daniel for sharing it. I feel it's important for us to also see from a lens of loss and damage, from a lens of global heat and cooling, because that is something which I was reflecting today, and have been reflecting from more of these kind of terminologies which we were talking yesterday and today, is like as a person who comes from a forested area, when there are cyclones, so it is very devastating in the coastal areas. But for us, it is not that devastating, which is losing of loss of life and houses, but that mere drop of unseasonal rains also destroys our crops, which is also affecting our way of livelihood and income, and putting us in a vicious circle of poverty and displacement and migration. And this, when I see it from a cooling perspective and loss and damage perspective, what I have been saying, that loss and damage needs to be seen from a lens where sometimes the loss which is not seen is not taken into consideration as loss and damages. And if we see it from a cooling perspective, it's like people, those who receive little rain can feel it as a relief. But for those little rains, the agriculture communities or the local communities or indigenous peoples, that is such a problematic source of cooling or a rain, and which is again as a devastation for the coastal areas. So how cooling and heat is so differently impacted and felt by different communities because of the geographical areas they are located. And that is one thing which I'm taking away from here again, is that it all comes down to solutions which is rooted with communities. And here we have such a diverse groups of stakeholders being here, and it's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana. Just another follow-up is, you work a lot with communities. So how do, the heat and cooling fraternity that is working on these extreme heat and sustainable cooling solutions, how can we fulfill our contributions, our responsibilities towards communities? How do we engage them in solutions and then act responsibly?
I think one of the key thing which comes in terms of how do we engage with communities is that as in the previous panels also they were being shared, and Dr. Radhika was also saying, it's like all of these solutions should be people's oriented, and at the same time it's also like back home people are struggling to have a dignified life where there has been able to have food in the table and a shelter in their home in terms of them. And in that struggle of basic needs, again when we have to think of global heat and cooling, which is also affecting us, I think it requires an embedded approach to reach out to communities so that it is not another additional burden, but is weaved into the existing policies and convergence schemes or social security schemes. Apart from that, it is also like how do we use the existing institutions like Gram Sabhas, Panchayati Raj institutions, Sarpanch, all of these people, because they have such power on ground. So I would say that it's important to use the already existing local institutions, government institutions, but also like traditional institutions of the communities, which is like Adivasis communities, indigenous peoples communities.
Deepa, what has been your reflection over the last 2 days?
Thank you, Chinmaya, and a very big thank you to Dr. Shrag and to Archana. I particularly want to thank you. I had the opportunity of spending time with Archana and thanking her personally, but this is a very great privilege for me to be sitting right next to you and recalling that our conversation 2.5 years ago when you were here for the big meeting. And you already mentioned that the urgency of the heat and cooling conundrum has really exacerbated over these past 2.5 years. But I think for someone from your standing, when you're talking of the continuum, the millennia of climate change and how we affect them, how we are affected by them, I think the key word is humility. And I was very grateful that you used it, because we have solutions, but we have to understand that they have to come with the humility of not knowing that mitigation is the correct answer or adaptation, and understanding and evolving and responding. And responding to what? Responding to what I started this we had in our first session, the heat divide. That is becoming so sharp that it just bothers me personally that we are looking for cooling solutions which will actually exacerbate heating and create a downward spiral instead of a virtuous upward spiral. And I think that for me has been the biggest takeaway from this meeting, the fact that we have been able to touch upon such a range of issues, right from policy, science and data, technology, finance, communications, institutional arrangements, equity and justice. So the ramifications of this issue and the intensity and involvement with which the team that put it together, the team from the National Disaster Management Authority, Department of Science and Technology, the World Bank, my own colleagues at NRDC, and how we were able to sort of leverage the Harvard convening has all made it so meaningful and has just intensified the necessity to respond quickly, effectively, but also continuously. And I think that is the important thing that both Archana and you have emphasized. And I would like very, very deeply to first thank everyone who has been part of this convening, but also to thank everyone for giving it thought on how we can make this convening something beyond an event. I think it's very necessary for us to actually get perspectives from the thoughtful people who are still in this room, to think about what is it that we can continuously take forward and what is it that they have taken forward. So if I may have your permission, Chinmaya, and ask maybe a couple of people to
Sure,
give
ma'am.
their thoughts,
Sure.
so that we can engage on how to take this and the Harvard convening and what NDMA did in February, bring it all together and make it a movement. I mean, the communication session was a great example of how we are all wanting to, get those policymakers, those range of stakeholders to understand the implications of what we are going through, and that this is a shared responsibility. So may I call upon someone in the audience? Anyone? Shruti?
Thank you, Deepa, and thank you, NRDC, for organizing this forum. I think bringing together such a huge variety of stakeholders is key, because it opens our minds to different dimensions of the problem that we are thinking about day in and day out. But I can talk from my personal experience that I'm steeped in the science and engineering and policy side of the things. So for me, understanding the urban design and planning challenge, for example, has been an eye-opener, where we are thinking about short-term mitigation strategies from cool roofs to long-term planning with nature-based solutions. I also viscerally felt the huge challenge under the PM Awas Yojana, where we are building tens of millions of houses, but there is, how do we make them more heat resilient or climate resilient? It's a huge challenge in terms of policy innovation that we are staring at. And just the idea of cooling poverty, right? Just the idea of how do we accelerate access to sustainable and more affordable cooling for the people who are most at risk. So yeah, those are some of the key takeaways. And I would say we need a huge amount of innovation on the governance side, on financing side, on policy side to tackle the huge challenge in front of us. So thank you. And we hope to see this to be an annual affair. So thank you, NRDC.
Maybe one more reflection? Yes.
So thank you again, Deepa ma'am, and to NRDC, a big congratulations to the entire team. I think you've put a great workshop together with immense knowledge sharing, I would say. I mean, there is so much of work happening globally on heating and cooling, and it was the right platform, where all the right institutes were there to share the knowledge. And as I was talking to you, I think it would be great to take it forward and not stop it for another year to come back, but take it forward through various ways, leverage this opportunity of this workshop to work together, maybe or to join, as I was saying to you, the Cool Coalition of UNEP, and several working groups that organizations could join with NRDC and other organizations. So congratulations, and it was a huge learning. I was also thinking, so there was of course, we have the science, and we looked, through the 2 days, a lot of science was talked about, a lot of technologies were talked about, and I guess, especially India being like a big country, the challenge is really on ground implementation. And so again, something that I believe we can do together, rather, and it would also mean, I think, working with inter organizations within the government as well. So for example, with NDMA we are working, so it would get integrated into heat action plans, but then the similar strategies have to be integrated into the urban guidelines and planning similarly. So maybe it's also working with different government departments together, something to take forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take your comment after, if I may just have an opportunity to reflect on what Shruti and Mini have highlighted, is that it is so amazing that this convening has brought together a professor from Harvard who's sitting on this side and a girl from one of the remotest parts of Odisha. And we are on the same platform thinking through how we can address these challenges. So I'm very grateful for the fact that the organizers have thought through intentionally of international, national, regional and sub-regional, what we call states in India, and then finally districts, cities, municipalities. So the range has been immense, and I really would like to recognize the thought and the sensitivity that has gone into this planning. For me, I think the important thing is that if we can all work together on this and see this as an annual event, and between events also, I mean, event is just sort of the kind of a post, but between those events, to make sure that there is progress at all these levels and how we could come back, jointly think about that progress, reflect on it, and see what we could do in the coming years. And it is in that context that I would like for us to be able to reach out to all the participants who were with us over the 2 days and those who could not be here as well, to make sure that this can become a movement. I think that's where the policymakers would then start to shift the needle. In India, I think in the last 5 years, I think people have realized that dealing with extreme heat cannot be just dealing with the crisis of the heat wave as and when it happens. The idea of a more resilient way of dealing with it is already taking seed.
Can I just make a quick observation, though, that I think is actually, it's really a compliment to NRDC and to your vision here, which is that I think it's remarkable to focus on the sustainability of cooling solutions. Let's just step back and see what's going on. India is experiencing greater numbers and more extreme heat waves. We still don't know what the mortality is. There haven't been appropriate excess mortality studies because the data are hard to come by. We're actually working on that right now, a group of us at Harvard. In that situation, it would be entirely understandable for India to say, who cares about the world? We're going to use whatever we need to, coal, whatever we need to make sure that our people survive, and put air conditioners everywhere, fueled by coal, and who cares about the emissions? And the fact that this convening is actually thinking about how to do this the right way, I think is an extraordinary vision that frankly gives me a lot of hope for the world. I can't say that my own government gives that same hope to me, but over time, it gives me hope that we can actually work on this together, and I thank you greatly for that.
Shall we just conclude here? So I think Professor Shrag, Dr. Shrag has said what we all have deep in our hearts. And I thank you, and I thank all of you for being here and for doing this. I think the important thing for me has been just not only the levels from sort of international to hyperlocal, but also the range of issues we have discussed and the potential and possibility that it has for the future. So I would just like once again to thank everyone who has been associated with this. The challenge here for me, if I started listing those, would be that what our audience would actually have to leave, because it is such a long list of people who have played such an important part. I'm reminded of that famous quote by Winston Churchill when it said that at the time of the end of the World War, that for the army, that never have so many owed so much to so few. So it's really, so few have owed so much to so many. I just would like to turn it on its head and just end by saying, I mean, it's one of the Urdu couplets which is very dear to my heart. It is by Iqbal, and it says, "Sitaron ke aage jahan aur bhi hain." That means there are worlds beyond the stars. That the journey is long. Abhi ishq ke imtihan aur bhi hain. That for our passion, there are many examinations. There are many challenges where we will be questioned and examined. So once again, सितारों के आगे जहां और भी हैं, अभी इश्क के इम्तिहान और भी हैं. So let us all be prepared for that and commit to that as we are gathered here to carry on this task, which I think is no longer a luxury, no longer a professional duty, but I think almost a moral imperative and responsibility. So thank you very much.